Welcome back to Velo Ohio, everyone. Today I'm excited because today we're talking wheels, specifically some brand new race wheels that I got for time trial and triathlon. So let's take a bit of a deep dive into these wheels, compare them to my old wheels, and I'll talk about why I think they're going to be a bit faster for me on race day. So to begin this video, let's see where I started. I've been racing on these Sram S80 wheels since 2018. I decided to buy these when I made a goal to try to get under 1 hour for a 40-kilometer time trial, so basically averaging about 25.4 miles per hour for that hour. I decided that I needed to invest in a little bit of weaponry to do that since I could only change my wattage so much. Now, why is a deep section wheel even faster than a conventional wheel anyway? Well, essentially, you're exposing less of the wheel to turbulent airflow. Every time that spoke whips through the air, it's going to create a little bit of a vortex behind it. So if you can take this front section, the top section, and the bottom section, and just turn that into a continuous airstream, you're going to end up with less of those vortices overall and basically cause less of that. It's essentially a suction force that's keeping you from going faster through the wind. These have performed really well for me. I'm really happy. If we look over their construction, you can see that there is an aluminum brake track, alloy brake track, bonded to this carbon fiber fairing. In this case, I do believe that the carbon fairing is structural, and these spoke nipples lie just beyond the carbon. I do love these wide bladed spokes. They have to be at least a 4-to-1 ratio, just furthering the aerodynamics of the wheel. I bought these wheels secondhand from a sponsored racer who decided that he was going to remove the decals just to not be in conflict with any of his other sponsorships. Now, if you didn't know that SRAM made wheels, well, essentially about a decade ago, SRAM acquired Zip. They took one of the older style Flashpoint, I believe it was the Flashpoint 80 wheel from the Zip lineup. They changed the spokes a little bit, they changed the hub a little bit, and then rebadged it as the Sram S80. They are actually 82 millimeters deep, but what's 2 millimeters between friends anyway? Now, one thing that was pretty appealing to me at the time was the alloy brake track. I was doing a fair amount of training outside, just trying to dial in my aerodynamic tuck position. When you have this alloy fairing, you don't need to switch back and forth between carbon-specific brake pads and just typical brake pads. So I could train on these miles upon miles and then just throw them in for race day as well without needing to adjust the brake pads. It really helps with the versatility of the wheel. Now, once you add in the rear wheel, I always love that hub sound. Once you add in the rear wheel, you are talking about a considerable amount of weight for the set. It was over 2,100 pounds. Some of that comes down to the fact that it does have that alloy construction and just the fact that the technology is a little bit older at this point. They are over a decade old. Honestly, I wasn't even too concerned with the weight. When I rode these and raced them, I used a aero cover for the rear wheel to enhance the aerodynamics. Once you're up to speed and you're not doing constant braking and acceleration, which really doesn't happen in a triathlon or a time trial anyway, that weight is negligible. That energy is just going to be stored within the hub, sort of acting like a freewheel. So if you do all the work to generate the power to get yourself up to speed, you're going to carry that with you. You can think of it sort of like a runaway train. Once it builds up all that momentum and inertia, it's going to take a lot to slow it down. So they carry speed well. Now, with such a nice wheel set, you're probably thinking, why would you want to move away from this? Really, it came down to one factor about the construction of these wheels, and that is the width of the brake track. So the external width here of this brake track is 19 millimeters wide. This is going to have a substantial impact on the type of tire that you want to fit to this. So in order to preserve the aerodynamic properties of this deep section wheel, you don't want to have a tire that's much wider than that brake track. Considering that most racers at this point will run a 25 millimeter wide tire, you're limited in your tire options when trying to fit a fast tire to this wheel. What I ended up doing was using a 700 by 20 Continental GP4000 S2. This internal rim width, I believe, is only 14 millimeters wide. So those Continental Grand Prix 4000 S2s blew up to 20 millimeters on the dot. That gave me a nice transition between the tire to the brake track, what you might run into if you try to use something like a 23 or 25. Sometimes they call it kind of a light bulb effect or an ice cream cone effect. When that airflow hits the wide tire, it's going to be disrupted and you're going to lose any of that benefit that you would get from having the deep section, as it's not going to follow a pathway around the wheel. Now, there are a few repercussions of using such a narrow tire. When you use such a narrow tire, you're going to have a pretty harsh ride. You've got to fill them up to about 110 psi to have optimal rolling resistance, and that's going to give you not much cushioning if you do hit any road imperfections. Also, when it comes to braking and cornering traction, your contact patch is so small that you lose a little bit of confidence as you really try to lean the bike into the turns. When it comes to time trialing or triathlon, you're trying to carry as much speed as possible through the turns. You're working so hard on the straightaway that you don't want to give up a second or two with the cornering. Now, if I ever encountered wet conditions, any of those shortcomings as far as cornering and braking would be amplified. The other downside to this particular wheel set is that because the technology is about a decade old at this point, it did only have a 10-speed compatible free hub here, which isn't actually a problem for me because my Quintana still has a 10-speed Shimano Ultegra rear derailleur, but moving forward to make it a little bit more future-proof, I did want to look for something with an 11-speed compatible free hub system. Now, I typically run a latex inner tube anyway, so that tubeless compatibility isn't such a big deal for me at this point, but moving into the future, I might consider that tubeless setup for triathlon at some point. So, with those disadvantages in mind, what am I looking for in my brand new wheel set? Okay, so this is the ICAN86. One of the first things that you'll notice about this wheel is that it doesn't have that alloy brake track. This actually has a basalt brake track, and you do need to use carbon-specific brake pads. That's something that I have yet to set up on the bike, but I did go ahead and order them, so I'm going to be making basically a transition and a commitment to riding with these all the time. You can use carbon brake pads on an alloy brake track. Of course, they're not going to be optimal, but then if you were to switch back to your carbon wheels, you could encounter a significant problem if you were to pick up any little bits of metal in the brake pad and you would just kind of scour the surface of your brand new, beautiful brake track. Obviously something we don't want to do. Personally, I tend to do so much training on my stationary trainer when it comes to my time trial bike. It really allows me to just commit to that aero position and put out a lot of training while I'm tucked into aero. I do fewer miles outdoors at this point. So committing to a fully carbon wheel year-round is a commitment and a trade-off that I'm willing to make at this point. So let's talk about the details of this wheel a bit. One other thing that we're going to notice about this wheel is that it has external spoke nipples as opposed to internal. Maybe that's going to cost me a watt. I'm really not too concerned about it. They do come with a kind of a tier 2 upgraded Novatec hub. They spin really well. Of course, the system's not loaded, but it is nice to see that really easy, smooth rolling. As far as the spokes are concerned, they are Sapum CX Rays. Definitely not quite as wide as the spokes that were on the Sram S80s. That, along with having the carbon brake track, contribute to a significant weight savings. The technology here is a decade newer, so we're talking about a little bit over 1,700 grams for the pair, really a 500 gram savings across the wheel. So we're basically taking a pound off the bike. Now you'll probably notice that I have a little bit of electrical tape on the rim. Now what's that about? Well, it's one thing for a wheel to be true, which is to say straight and even this way, but it's another thing for a wheel to be balanced. Now wheels might come balanced as far as having a distribution evenly of weight across the wheel, but then when you throw in the inner tube, you put the tire on, with a valve extender, this side of the wheel, where it actually has to be a touch reinforced as well around that hole, is typically going to be heavier. So if you were to take a unbalanced wheel and hold it like this, that side with the valve invariably will go to the bottom. So using these 3-pound golfing weights, they're just a little bit of lead with adhesive on one side, you can slowly add weight to the unbalanced side, and what you can end up with is a wheel that won't move whatsoever when you let go of it like that, regardless of where you put it. Now, is that obsessive compulsive and maybe overanalyzing the small details? Yeah, it could be, but if you've ever wound up the rear wheel while it's in the work stand and you can feel it, the bike vibrating up and down, you can feel that oscillation. I don't know if that's energy lost, I don't know if that's energy returned to the system, but I just have to assume it's not helping your forward progress. So I like to have all my wheels balanced. If nothing else, it gives me a little bit of peace of mind that the bike's not holding me back whatsoever. So coming into the biggest consideration with these wheels, these wheels have a brake track width of 25 millimeters, so a full 6 millimeters wider than my Sram S80s. Now what that allows me to do is to run a labeled 23 millimeter tire on this wheel with the 17.5 millimeter wide internal width. This 23 actually inflates to a 25. So that gives a perfectly flush profile between the tire and the brake track. Aerodynamically speaking, that is an optimal situation for the airflow to pass over the tire and then continue over the side of the rim. You might be wondering why I'm not using a 25 millimeter wide tire if 25 millimeters roll faster in laboratory testing. Well, because that 25 is actually going to blow up a little bit wider, it's going to blow up to maybe 27 millimeters or so and disrupt that aerodynamic profile. ICAN does suggest a 23 millimeter tire for the front wheel in order to preserve those aerodynamic characteristics. Once you're over about 18 miles per hour or so, the aerodynamics are going to outweigh the marginal rolling resistance performance, where a 25 will be a watt or two faster than a 23. So not only will this 23 millimeter tire roll faster than a 20, but it's going to give me better braking performance and it's going to give me better cornering traction. Not to mention the upgrade in tire technology. I don't have a 4000 S2 on here. I was able to put a Continental GP 5000. And I tried to find the shortest valve extender that I could, just so that it doesn't protrude much from the rim. Another nice aspect of these wheels is that they are tubeless compatible, so if I ever decide to make that switch, maybe if I'm doing an Ironman and I just don't want to have to deal with replacing an inner tube where you're covering over 100 miles or something like that, that tubeless option is available to me. Now when it comes to the rear wheel, I do actually have a 25 millimeter GP 5000 on here, where it's not the leading edge of the bike. The fact that it's a little bit wider than the brake track isn't really a big deal in this situation, and we can opt for the 25 just for a little bit more comfort, a little bit more traction, and just to get that extra watt or two of rolling resistance performance out of it. So if we're playing that game of wider is better, why didn't I just get a wheel with a 28 millimeter brake track so that I could use a 25, which would eventually blow up to fit flush with the rim? Basically because I'm constrained by the width of my brake pads within my Quintana. I can't get my brakes to spread any wider than about 26 millimeters, so I knew that 25 was going to be my limit. The brake track is 25 millimeters, but it does extend to about 27 or 28 at the mid-rim. I'm not much of an aerodynamics engineer at all. I have to assume they did that just to optimize the airflow and just make them that much more slippery in the wind. One thing I have to mention about ICAN is that they've been excellent through the customer service process. When I initially got this wheel, I had requested that it comes with a SRAM or Shimano compatible free hub, and it shipped with a Campy free hub. One other thing that I noticed is when I put it up onto the truing stand and gave it a spin, the bearings just did not spin as smoothly as the front. That may or may not be a problem. It's not a loaded system and it's brand new, but it just didn't give me the confidence that it came with perfectly excellent bearings like it did in the front wheel. So I got a hold of ICAN just through email. They immediately sent out a SRAM Shimano compatible 3-hub body, and they sent out the bearings for the replacement. So we can take a little bit of a field trip here. We're going to go over to Franklinton Cycleworks, my favorite bicycle co-op in all of Ohio, and we're going to replace the bearings. So whenever I need help, I don't have the tool that I need, I don't have the knowledge that I need, I love stopping by Franklinton Cycleworks in Franklinton. It's definitely one of my favorite bike shops in Ohio, and it's different in the sense that they'll give you a workspace and a little bit of technical know-how if you want to do the work yourself, but you just don't know how to do it or you don't have the tools. So let's see if they can help me out with these hubshell bearings. Okay, so through Studio Magic, that was really easy. So we've got the new bearings in here. They spin excellently, just like I wanted them to. So the last little thing that I want to do before we get this wheel race ready is actually put the disc cover on there. So I won't be taping this down today, but this is the same cover that I used on my Sram S80s. Once you get that lined up, you just pretty much follow around the perimeter with some high quality 3M electrical tape, and it sticks on there really flush. I think I used the same tape for about 3 years consecutively with the SRAMs. It never peeled up and it did a great job. On the rear wheel, you're extending that advantage of the deep section rim so that airflow just passes undisturbed as optimally as it can as it approaches the back wheel. You could do that on the front, and they do in the track, but outdoors with any kind of wind, it would just create a really dangerous situation. But ultimately, this is the way that I tend to race. Unless you're doing a I don't know, a British hill climb championship and everything is just steep uphill. If you're going over 12 miles an hour, any additional weight is well worth the aerodynamic benefit that you're going to get from a rear disc cover. Overall, what am I hoping for from these brand new wheels over the Sram S80s? When you combine all of its advantages, better aerodynamic performance, better rolling resistance, better braking traction, better cornering traction, which then just gives me a little bit more confidence. I don't know if you can quantify that specifically over 10 miles, but I guess I'm hoping for something like 30 seconds. If it could live up to that, I'd be pretty happy. Of everything that I've been able to tell you about these wheels, I can't actually tell you how they perform in the real world whatsoever. It's still winter here in Ohio, so I've yet to use them outside. But so far, I've been happy with their construction, I'm really happy with the ICAN customer service, and I can't wait to get the rubber on the road and see how they feel. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe so that I can continue to bring you some excellent content. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll definitely get another video up when I'm ready to ride these outdoors. Thanks a lot.